Hello, everybody. I hope y'all had a good Labor Day holiday and that you're ready to go. One thing I've noticed on what I've been seeing posted, I feel like I may have rushed a little bit and I rethought my process here. And I think that what we're going to do between now and next week is just slow down and focus on how we want to consider the use of the picture plane and using thumbnails to kind of organize our thoughts in space. Actually, I feel like thumbnails are probably the most important decision you make in a drawing because everything else, once you've established it, you work it out as you go. But if you don't make a good decision on your thumbnail and you don't really consider all the options while you're doing those, you've pretty much committed yourself to whatever you've got to work with. So one thing I want to talk about today, and I want y'all to really think about and practice, is how in the world can we make the best design possible with whatever it is we're working on? Right now, you guys have the freedom to set up whatever you want. You're working from your own creative process, and that begins as soon as you start arranging objects. And that's one of the things we want to think about is the idea of composition. But I feel like that's something that as soon as you start just being aware of and taking ownership of, it'll really make a difference in all of your artwork. How it is as important as what it is. You can take the most mundane object and you can give it an expression just by the decisions you make and how you portray it, and especially compositionally. We have to realize that every decision we make in the composition adds to the content. So that's what I really want you all to just sort of do in your thumbnails. I want you to not think of a thumbnail as just, oh, this thing I got to go through. Thumbnails are where you as the artist really work out your response to that object. So what we want to talk about first is I'm going to just redefine what we want to be thinking about with a thumbnail. For my first thumbnail, I'm just getting the most obvious thing out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and do my first two thumbnails. I'm doing both of these in that same standard format of a sheet of paper. Like I said, that is pretty much allowing the paper to dictate my composition right off the bat. So I always try to consider that, at least just to get it out of the way. So on this one, we've got, a horizontal, and here we've got a vertical, or you might call it landscape and portrait, however you want to refer to it, as long as you kind of know what we're talking about. So on this, the first thing we want to think about, whatever it is we're drawing, is going to be, again, think about how you want to place things, possibly on the rule of thirds. Dividing our picture plane into thirds, which means any dominant vertical or horizontal would be built, try to line it up on one of those lines. But I'm just going to draw what's over here on a shelf real quick. I'm just picking a top shelf there. So that shelf I would put, that is my horizontal line that establishes the shelf. There's a Santa Claus, so I'd put him about here. That doesn't really go off. There's a little stuffed animal there. There's a thing behind it, and another Santa Claus. So this is all I want on a thumbnail. These do not have to be extended drawings. Now, sometimes on my later thumbnails, I really start thinking about little details. But on the first few thumbnails, when you're just saying, here's the information, how do I want to put it into that picture plane? All I want you to do is start thinking about how to tighten up that picture plane and make every space purposeful. What happens here is, because of my arrangement over there, I've got extra negative space here, and I've got a little bit tighter here. This could work, but probably if I did that. So a lot of times on my first thumbnail, I might even do something like this. I've got it drawn in, and I just go in and rethink. Okay, that's a tighter composition. Notice how just bringing that line in, I just omitted all of this redundant information. That wasn't really adding. Now, if it's balancing it out, sometimes you would intentionally leave extra space to create balance. But in this, everything was over here, so it was already kind of out of balance. So just chopping off all this unnecessary redundant visual information tightened it up. Also, because of the angle of my picture plane compared to where I'm standing, I've got extra here. So what I might also want to do is chop that off. But now look what I did. I've now tightened it up, and it actually starts to be kind of like coherent. I could actually have kind of an almost round composition because the way this is and the way that is. So that might be where I end up with in the end. But what we want to do is not just go, okay, that works. We want to be as creative as possible. So what I start thinking about now is how can I arrange things? Because one of the things that we're ultimately going to work toward, and when we get to our more advanced and final drawings, one of the most important things of any piece of art is unity. How do you create unity? So what's going to happen is I'm just going to draw 4 shapes. I've got 4 shapes in a picture plane. They all are existing, and like we've said, there's the picture plane, so they're all in that same imaginary space. But right now, there's no unity. When you look at these, you see all of them separate. But what we want to do is try to find ways to tighten up our composition to make it more interesting and to create unity. So what we want to first start thinking about is how can we create unity? Well, when they're spread out, in a 2-dimensional way, it's kind of hard to do. But the first thing you can do is something as simple as drawing. I didn't draw that very straight. But let's draw the picture plane, because now we know that they exist in a space that's defined with a picture plane. So you now have a sense of depth. So the next thing I could do is maybe cast some shadows. So where's my light source? I'm going to think there's a light source back here. So let's just cast shadows. So now each of those objects is casting a shadow. So now we know that all 4 of these objects exist in the same space, on the same plane, with the same light source. That's working toward unity. So here's an example of how we move from this sort of separateness into a more unified structure. So in my thumbnail, what I would do is think about, well, how can I arrange these things maybe in a way that starts to be more interesting? That's not the best. But see, here's where thumbnails come in. I just quickly start to do a couple more thumbnails and think, well, I like that sticking up. Maybe put the circle there, and then maybe that one there. I don't know. So this is what I start thinking in thumbnails is, what is the most interesting arrangement? And then I think, well, where do I crop it? That's what we want to think about, is how do I start to create this arrangement? So with this being thought about, working toward unity, what I would ideally do at this point is go, and since I'm in control of that subject matter, I would literally go and move them around. But what if you're drawing something like sitting outside? Because I love to do sketches when I'm out somewhere. I don't do it as much as I wish I did, but when I do, I'm always like, man, I need to do this all the time. I love to go to like the gardens, like the Arboretum in Dallas, or especially the Japanese gardens in Fort Worth. In fact, before the weather gets bad, some of y'all may even think about going down there and just give yourself an afternoon to just sit and find a place that you want to draw. Or you can do this locally. I want y'all to not just feel that you have to sit inside and do drawings of stuff. Go out and find a real environment that you respond to, and then just sit down and go through this process. But when you go to that space, you got to realize that what you may be seeing may be, this thing like this, the bridge is there, trees everywhere, other stuff off in the distance, and you have to make a decision, what all do I want to show? Well, the thing you want to think about is, where do I want to place things on these thirds? So you can see here that I basically put the bridge on a third and this on a third. So then I think that was probably on a third, and those went around like that and got smaller. And so I basically constructed it on the thirds. But when you're in that environment, you're seeing all of this, and you have to think about, thumbnails are basically your crop and zoom. Oh, the cat joined us, if y'all heard that. So that's what we want to be thinking about. Now, I want you all to always think of those extremes. How can I present that information as a panoramic? Well, the problem is it's hard for me to remember what's off over there. But I know that this went this way and back around, and the circles went there. The bridge came this way, the tree was over there. There were more trees. So always at least give yourself that option of something like a panoramic or the classic Instagram square format. But these are the things I want you to think about when you're drawing the thumbnails. We've got to really think about how are we going to tighten in, even come in as much as cropping parts of it. If I start to come in so tight that I start to crop, you know, do I want to chop off this edge and maybe leave that edge almost touching? Maybe this one goes off. Do I want to bring the circle really close? So you got to realize these relationships to the edge of the picture plane are extremely important. They can either create tension or they can create more abstraction. Anytime we crop an object when we're zooming in, we're actually abstracting that object. And so we're actually zooming in and paying more attention, not to the overall shape and form, but really starting to get into what is the nature and the details of this object. So what we're going to do for your project this week before Monday, I'm going to create a lesson, and what I want you all to do is at least 10 thumbnails being as creative as possible. And what creative means is the opposite of creative is doing something you already know, something obvious. So what we want to do is start trying to push creativity in our design, and that's how we're going to end up making better and better drawings. Because the more creative you are, the more you tighten things up, try to get rid of as much negative space as possible. Just, you know, push these things together and crop it so that we're losing all this redundant, empty, boring space. And also, I'm being lazy. Think about changing the direction. If I'm drawing these objects on a shelf, how would they change if I set them down on a round? We have a round table over here. What if I change that perspective and drew them looking down? What else is up there? There's a little tree. So that's another thing. Think about changing your viewpoint. We don't have to draw everything just looking at the sides. Sometimes you can create a whole new expression by looking down at something. And those are the decisions I want you to really think about in your thumbnails, is really just going beyond the obvious. So that's it. If y'all have any questions, let me know, but I'm sure that it's just a matter of you working it out and pushing yourself to go a little bit beyond just that obvious idea.